afternoon. Call a special board and education business committee meeting together for Tuesday, April 10th. First item is the agenda. First item is to respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. Adoption of the agenda. Trustee DeGroot, Trustee Schmidt. All those in favor?
Okay.
Opposed?
And then we have it all.
This is your show today, isn't it?
Yes, thank you.
Superintendent's here for a ride, and you just can do all the work. Doesn't get better than that.
Superintendent helped. So we're here to continue our budget discussions. There has been a BEBC meeting on March 27th where the board was presented with some information on the budget position known at that time. That was followed with a little bit more information through the board meeting last week. And now we're at the place where we can start to introduce a new reconciled funding position, start to talk about potentially accessing surplus from the current year and the prior year, and bringing that into the budget reconciliation, and costing the options that were presented through the committee meeting two weeks ago. So we have a presentation, and I'll actually, it's kind of easier if I stand at the front, so I'm going to get up and go to the front and we'll walk through. It's not a lot of slides, but it is to start to introduce the costing of some of the items that we have currently been considering. And there will be follow-ups at the next BEBC meeting where we'll give you sort of sheets that relate to each of those and show you how they track through from the budget position where we started and bringing those options in where we'd be at now. So here we are. Introduction to the presentation. This is about the 2018-2019 annual budget. Specifically, we're talking more about the operating budget, but there are some elements of the special purpose funds in this presentation as well. We can move to the next slide. So where we were at on March 27th was showing the board a shortfall of just over $1 million. And that was made up of the reconciliation, which you see above, which we've gone through now twice, at the board meeting last week and 2 weeks ago at BEBC. Now, a couple of things have happened since that time, and a couple of items we've added in there, because we're not sure that they can be ignored in the next year. They may be have-to-dos into the budget. They weren't built in originally. So the first one is the opening of Mill Bay Elementary School. So that decision came after we prepared the first reconciliation. So we need to be factoring in the staff required to do that. It's anticipated that when the children arrive, students arrive, the teachers will come out of the general teaching budget that's already in existence. But an administrator needs to be put in place that doesn't exist today. So one of the main items in there is the creation of a principal position, which has not been factored into the budget to date. When a school reopens, it needs a clerical person. So we are anticipating a 6-hour clerical. That is our minimum standard for safety in the office. 7 hours is the maximum day. Furniture also included in that is a half-time custodian. If we're to open 4 classrooms and have gymnasium space, we think about approximately a half-time custodian would be required. And there's going to be some startup costs associated as well for resourcing a school. So you've often heard in the past, when the board is going through a school closure process, that it would save approximately $250,000 when you close a school. Well, it costs approximately $250,000 to reopen a school. So we brought that in. That decision has now been made and now needs to be built into the budget. Maintenance vehicle replacement. So we've talked with the operations department about what the needs would be for the next year. That amount would represent either replacement of a cube van and repurposing one of our cube vans to take one of those off the road, or 2 maintenance vans. We do have a practice of buying 1 or 2-year-old vehicles, and we think we can do that if we need to supplement it back to go to the supply allocation, which is where we're currently buying the vehicles from now. The other item we've added is furniture and equipment replacement for $75,000, and that could be any amount. But what we've been hearing through the liaison meetings and as we're starting to grow again is that a lot of the equipment is becoming quite dated, hasn't been an investment in getting that up to date. Certainly, the furniture that we have in storage is in storage for a reason. It's been kind of put away and left, and it's old. It's the chairs that are attached to desks, and as we start to grow again, is that what the furniture that we want to be pulling out? Or should we start to look at replacements and starting to get set up the classrooms for some 21st century learning environments?
just add that they're all different colors and different sizes as well, the furniture, so
Yeah.
it would be nice to have something that looks like it's ready for learning.
And that's not, I mean, that amount could be anything. I mean, it's just to start to recognize that we have to start considering an equipment replacement. When we were declining in enrollment, furniture wasn't really a consideration. We were putting furniture away because kids were leaving the district. And that also helps out the school somewhat with their supply allocation, because often when they need an emergent item or an equipment item, they buy it out of their school supplies. So having some budget where we can start to address those stoves that are failing and refrigerators or sewing machines or new desks or weed whackers or it's something to start to build. And so we feel like kind of have to minimally put that in. And the fourth item that's happened since the last BEBC was the PSEC release of compensation freeze on principal and vice principal. So a decision was made to allow the increase that was permitted. Now that needs to be reflected. The salary scales have changed. That now needs to be reflected at our opening position of the next year's budget. So we now have, with that, a revised shortfall of $1,539,000. We can still stay here. On principal vice principal exempt compensation, the amount that was permitted is fixed to the calendar year, so that there's no further improvements permitted prior to January 1st of 2019. So we haven't built anything else into the next year's budget. We won't know whether, like, it is possible that after January 1st, 2019, there could be another percentage increase. We haven't built that in, but we'll show you that we have included an amount for the grid step. So there is still some funding in there should improvements come later on, but we limited it because this raise basically takes up all the capacity the board has from January until December. So the next one is to start off with
Sorry, can I just go back? The vehicle replacement, you're proposing $60,000.
50.
Sorry. Is there a plan behind that, or is that just a proposal for this year? Is this ongoing? Because usually
We'll need ongoing funding to start to catch up, but I think for what we're recognizing the requirement is for the next year, could be accommodated. It's either going to be a Q van or 2 work vans. And we typically top it up out of the supply allocation. So if it actually is $60,000, $10,000 that comes out of supplies.
No, but are we going to see a replacement budget plan?
We'll need to produce that
But your best bet is that it's going to be around the $50,000
for next year. The next year after that might be something completely different. The year after that, I mean, we have vehicles that are starting to, you're hearing, they're getting older, and we need to start building that, but we'll need, like a facilities plan, know when we need to do the replacements. We need to age them and get the mileage and figure out when they're typically going to come up.
But what I
Is
mean,
that the question?
no, because usually it's you work out whether it's a 7-year replacement plan or 10-year replacement plan. You say it's going to be $500,000
Oh, I
and
see.
it's $50,000 a year, and you budget for you feed it up front and then reduce the amount. But it's usually something that's non-debatable. It's a fixed amount. You make a decision, and then 5 years later, it's reviewed and say, "Oh no, it's too much or too little." So, sorry.
You will see a bit of a theme here, we've clearly recognized one of the joys of an increasing district. It's not just furniture that we used to put away. We used to cabbage parts from other things and old telephone systems and all kinds of things that when we were shrinking, we found we could manage without as much attention to replacement in a whole variety of areas as we can now, because we A, run out of those things, and B, they're old. So in terms of all kinds of different types of equipment, so you're going to see a plan coming forward next year for how we start to address those things in the future. A variety of things, not just vehicles.
As we were closing schools, we borrowed things from those buildings. We took their phone systems, we took their furniture, and we redistributed it. But that's now, we're at a different place, as you see with the population trends. But I see I think I know what you're asking about with the plan. Is that a fixed amount that we need to put aside every year to ensure that our vehicles are in constant rotation? And we'll figure that out, what the amount is. We think that addresses the immediate need, but we know we need to develop a plan. So back to this one. So kind of, what are the main reasons why we have a shortfall? Mill Bay was reopened. Prior year's budget was balanced using surplus. We haven't brought any in yet, but we'll show you that next. That 1.95% payroll tax. That's costing the board. And school trustee election. Just a few highlights. Some of the reasons if everybody was to kind of wonder. Those are a few things. On to the next one. So how are decisions being made on how to balance the operating budget? I think right now that the survey is in. Department groups and public comments. We'll have the public meeting after the advisory next week. We've had department group meetings, so the board has heard feedback through those liaisons. Still have CUPE's meeting to happen. The survey is closed. It was highly successful in my view, with I think 349 respondents, which is about 70% more than last year. So that's a lot of feedback, and probably tied into the social media presence that we now have, and that survey going out through the Facebook page and people actually seeing it and responding. It might not sound like a big number, but I don't know that we've ever heard from 349 people on a budget item unless it's a school closure. Currently we're forecasting surplus, as we've shown the board at the last board meeting. At that time it was $1,447,000 over and above the 1.284 that is still in the bank from the prior year. Also know that there's areas of the budget where resources can also be directed, and that's what we're going to be showing you here, that are consistent with some of your strategic priorities. So we have some items listed where we don't have dollar amounts yet, but they are part of your strategic priorities, so we'll need to be considering those. So we can start, and this is where it comes in, and we've got it animated. The opening shortfall, we just saw that figure, and if we were to bring in surplus, right now, the accumulated surplus of last year and this year's projection is about $2.7 million. So those are the two numbers I just gave you. To bring in about 1.7 of that leaves in the bank just over $1 million of surplus, which is 1.3% of budget. So the board's policy is to have between 1 and 3. That would leave 1.3 remaining. So, it's a starting point as a suggestion. I think that it may be something that the board could be comfortable with and still meeting their policy requirements. So if we did that, there would actually be an adjusted budget position that's positive, but there's a lot of asks, and those are what we're going to go through now, and we'll go through again in more detail the next BEDC. So the adjusted budget position would be about $161,000 of positive, which is money to spend on something, and we'll go through these now. The total cost of moving the exempt staff and principal, vice principal group up one band is double that. But we don't know when the timing would be, that would be permitted. And so what we're suggesting is to potentially budget for half of that amount, because it's not likely to be July 1st that movement would occur. When it would occur is still up to PSEC, and there's really been no guidance on when that's going to occur. So we think if we put the full amount in, I don't think that's going to be realistically what will be the board's liability, but it's not going to happen immediately. And there's also the whole piece around the performance plans and things that needs to come in place. If we don't put anything in, then we're not providing some funding in the budget. So that's why we're suggesting roughly half the amount to make sure that we're close to kind of happy medium between the two. That would cost $107,000. Starts to eat up the adjusted budget position. The next item we have here is around the Citizens Committee, which will meet next week and make some recommendations back to the board on trustee compensation. So we know that it's been about 20 years since there's been a review. This is an estimated amount. It's not based on, it is based on an estimate that I did, but it's not based on any feedback yet from that group. It's also effective in November, so that's why it's probably a less amount than what the annual amount would be, because it wouldn't be effective until a third of the way through the school year, because we would have July and August and September and October already completed. So we have an amount there. The next amount would be around trustee pro-D. This is around the idea of trustees having a more discretionary Pro-D fund where if they have a desire to learn something beyond what is provided through the association, there's an opportunity to do that, to go and expand your learning capacity. The estimate that we have in there right now is at $1,500 a trustee, so that's 7 times $1,500. So that amount is there. We'll go to the next one. You can stop me if there's any questions. We also have wellness and absence management, and this may actually not be a cost item, and I think we need to get our heads around this one a little bit more. We have a bit of a working group that's been gathering information on wellness. We have our staff going off to BCPC and starting to get trained on the absence management component of the program as well as the wellness component of the program. What we're realizing is we need somebody to do that. There's work to be done around promotion of wellness, preparation of materials, activities for wellness, and then around the absence management, around the data analysis, the preparing the principals for the conversations. But if it's successful, it shouldn't actually be a cost item. The introduction of an absence and wellness program typically, I think BCPC's objective isn't that it's a savings. It's actually, the wellness tends to be the focus, is that you make people better and they attend work more often or are healthier. But there is a savings because effectively you should have a reduction in your absenteeism. So there is a cost to having somebody to do that work, but it may be something that we can take out of our absence budget. I guess is the point. But we do have the cost of what we think might need to be supplementally added to the district's staffing capacity to do that. So that'll get a little bit more later on. This is kind of a catch-all, and I'll explain here. Finance, purchasing, payroll, human resources. In finance department, we're finding that we're unable to fully implement the school-based accounting software that we've purchased, which is called KEP. And a big component of that is getting it set up so that parents can make online payments. So we're not really 21st century on our payment collection from parents right now. Checks and cash come in with kids, but we want to get to the place where the parents can pay from an app on their phone and fees are paid. We can't get to that work. It's too much for and we've been dealing with this through the audit committee. We also know that we need to strengthen our internal audit process, which is get out to more schools. Get out to more schools and do audits. That's again part of the Auditor General's, it was part of the Auditor General's recommendations, but it's coming now through the ministry as an expectation that districts strengthen their internal audit program. We're also finding on the finance side just volume in accounts payable. We may be smaller than we were 10 years ago, but our capacity, our output is higher. In purchasing, same issue. We used to have 3 people in the department, now we have 2. They're finding real difficulties in really highly qualified individuals in all of these positions. Just finding it's really difficult to keep up with the amount of buying that we've been doing, the grants that the government's been providing, the $50 per head FTE, the tenders, the reopening in Mill Bay will mean a whole bunch of purchases and acquisitions.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this was one of the things that would finally take one of the auditor's points off of our report every year, is if we managed to do this then, because one of their biggest concerns was the cash in schools and how we're taking control. So that would actually support what our auditors have been asking us to do.
And another component of that is we could centralize the elementary school banking out of the school board office. So we could do the bank reconciliations here and take some of that load off the school clerical, which you also hear about their workload.
Which would support
Some of it could be more centralized, and having somebody to support Kev is somebody to support the clerical as well. That's just the finance component. Payroll, unprecedented number of QP workers. We never had so many because of the education assistants that have been hired to meet the increased number of students. So we're finding, again, highly qualified people, but the capacity, we're just expanding beyond where we were before. A number of teachers that we hired, the number of TTOCs that we've hired recently. Payroll has points in their cycle where they're really under a lot of pressure. Human resources. The last 2 decades we've been in decline in enrollment, and we've dropped by a population of 200, and the retirees kind of make up the difference, right? As you drop in enrollment, you drop the number of classrooms, the teachers retire, well, you just kind of end up just not really doing a lot of recruitment. That's all changing again. So human resources is under a great deal of stress. So we're just trying to figure out a way in our minds, is there something, it's almost a jack of all about tradesperson, like how do you support all of those departments in some capacity, and maybe it's a person that has a finance and payroll skill set that translates, and even the benefits administration, the number of new hires and the work just to sign those individuals up, because we're hiring so many people. We haven't really got our heads around what that would look like, so we've just budgeted for a person thinking, because it can't be 2 hours here and 2 hours there, but it is at a critical place where we're finding that our staff here are kind of at the limit of what they can do. So we put something there for consideration. Next one. International Student Program Homestay. It's a 0, but it isn't a 0. Actually, it's a 0.5 FTE for increased homestay, but they're generating that revenue, and we haven't been budgeting for the revenue that's been coming in. Student numbers going up. We have to charge a fee for the homestay. So everybody coming into the district pays a fee for that. So we actually think it's a net 0 that we can increase the revenue and do that position to take some of the pressure off, because that program has grown to the point that the people in those positions are working probably 50% of what the normal ratio would be for somebody in those jobs in the province above. Next one, trades from operating to capital. We've been talking about this one for a few years, and this is around the number of people that work in our capital department that used to be in our operations department. So we have 22 tradespeople plus grounds, and we charge, I think, about 10 of them to capital projects. Might be okay for the next year, and we may be able to take this one off the list, because reopening Mill Bay actually means there's a lot of capital work again, but it means also that those people aren't doing maintenance in schools. But it's an item that we know we need to be addressing, rethinking about, keeping on the list. Next one up, the new page. Small school viability is one of the board's strategic priorities. The item that kind of represents is looking at small school clerical in the secondary level. We made some cuts there a number of years ago when enrollment was in decline. Some of those schools are starting to grow again, and we're seeing that there's some pressure there. So that's another one of our considerations. Next one, 21st century learning environment. That's another dollar number that you could put whatever you wanted there. What is the right amount? What we learned through the acquisition of all the furniture through the Bill 28 is nobody wanted the regular stuff anymore. Like when you put it out to schools, what do you want? You have new classrooms. How do you want to furnish them? It wasn't just traditional desks and square tables. It was half moons and it was rainbow tables. Now I don't know what a rainbow table is, and it's like long tables, and they're not necessarily more expensive than classroom sets, but they're different than what we have now. If you put 6 kids around a table, that's actually less expensive than 6 individual desks, but it's different. What people asked for wasn't what we have, what we have been buying. It's different stuff. And some of it is expensive. If you want a stand-up table or stand-up desk or an adjustable desk for a child, that's expensive. More so than a half moon. But when do we start to change the way the classrooms look? We have the issue with the couches and that are being brought in from outside, and how clean are they versus ones that we could be buying if that's the way we want the classrooms to look. Could be any dollar amount. Again, we just parked something there to be thinking about. Our next item, reconciliation. This is really around the relationship between the school district and the local chiefs and councils, and the way we use our targeted funding and the supports that it provides versus the supports that the core budget could be providing for those students as well. It's a complex one, so I didn't have a dollar amount for what that is, but something that certainly I think again kind of aligns with the board's strategic priorities. So it's just here to also have further discussion around. Communications plan. Some of that is one time, and some of that is ongoing, and there are different components to that, and that's really around how robust does the board want the website to be? How robust does the board want the communications to be? To buy a new website is approximately $100,000, but it also requires and which could be a one-time. So a portion of that could be a one-time expenditure, but there's also the continued upkeep of the content, which requires people to do that, and also the, not just the school district content, but the school's content. So it's kind of around the whole plan for communications. So sort of some of that has come out of the recent consultant report that some of you have participated in hearing, and we'll have more details on that when we get to the next meeting. We're just more introducing these topics tonight. Technology plan. Last year, the tech budget was increased by $100,000 and then topped up by another $50,000 for this year. So that $50,000 for this year was temporary, so it's come back out. But last year's 100 has stayed in. It's still not meeting the demands of teacher devices, student devices, and training of the teachers to use those devices. So that's something that I know we've heard so far through liaison meetings. And that number was larger. This is the comeback with the bare minimum ask number right now from the tech department. So that's there, and we'll have more details on that. Early years supports is in your strategic priorities. So again, we brought it forward because we saw it there, and we don't know what that could be. That again, I guess that's part of the board defining what that is and how to support those objectives. That may be partly covered off once we figure out what that $12.3 million is that the province has allocated for early years, which is through through the education budget, which if the district was to get their 1.5% based on the size of the school board would be $180,000, but nobody knows yet what that announcement was for. So yeah, we have a question mark there. I think we're getting close to our last item, which is around learning commons. Some of that ties into the communication plan. There is some overlap because the new website also could be a learning tool. I'm not extremely literate in the term learning commons, but Rod understands it, and I do understand that it is more about how you interact with each other and the repurposing of the way we use libraries. I'm not sure I'm
You're doing good.
completely on track. And we don't know what that is yet.
Let's just break into that. Yes.
So we'll have a larger discussion later in the week. The notion of a learning commons, and you've heard it from teachers, we've heard it from Erica and Chris in previous visits, is around how do we resource teachers adequately to use the enabling features of the new curriculum. It lets us do a whole lot of things and gives us permission, but without the resources to do that, it's challenging. So learning commons, we're lucky here that we continue to have a DRC, but that's an old structure based around old models. However, we have a place and we have people. So learning commons districts that are moving to a learning commons model, it looks at places like our DRC as well as libraries and schools and rethinks those. Libraries are no longer places of just a consumption of knowledge. You go and get a book and it's sort of passive consumption of knowledge. It's where you go and create things. They have 3D printers, they have robotics kits, they have access to kids to construct new knowledge in that place. Same here for teachers. It's not just I need a kit on, Eagle of the Ninth in grade 9, because that's when I always teach Eagle of the Ninth, and I get my kit of books and you go back and I teach the Eagle of the Ninth. It's how we have the components so that as teachers are addressing the increasingly personalized needs in their classrooms, they are able to go in and assemble things together in the kinds of supports and tools and resources they need to address the curriculum, putting things. So it's less like a restaurant with a menu and more like a grocery store or a food fair. We can go in and assemble the things that you need for your particular circumstances. There's also what Jason alluded to, there's a portal part to that, because that also occurs online as well as in the real place where you can go in and look around. So that's sort of the model to how do we take what we have and turn it into something new and modern and meets the needs of teachers as they're trying to find the resources for delivering all the kinds of things we want them to deliver to kids. More later in the week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's the bottom of the list, and unfortunately, we've shown you some really cool stuff, but the resources may need to be reallocated to address some of those, or some of those won't be possible. So if we were to add all of those in, that's $700,000 more items than what we've shown, bringing in the $1.7 million worth of surplus. But it's a starting place for discussions and around prioritizing and looking at some of the existing budget items. So what we haven't really shown you is any recommendations for any changes to save money in areas where we could then translate into here, and that's the next sort of phase where we need to get to. But there's lots of neat stuff up there. So costume enhancement fund is just, again, reminder slide. You had this before, that so far we're in a stage 1 funding around costume enhancement and funding teachers. It's about 80% of what it was for last year. So just to remember that there'll be another phase to actually get the money for what the actual teachers are, and we're hopeful that that'll all be delivered as it was this year. And the overhead
So
component.
Mr. Inquist, the $600,000, $659,000 shortfall, is that based on 80% funding, or is it based on 100% funding estimate?
It's
We're getting about 81% of last year's.
we're getting about 81% of last year's funding up front. Well, not up front. Like basically, the province has committed so far $284,000 to funding the memorandum of agreement. Last year they committed $360 million. Yeah. So far they haven't made a full commitment. The Treasury Board has not released funds to the province to fully fund at the level of last year.
So why are we not 19% of our budget in a shortfall rather than just 0.5%? I'm not quite understanding.
You're wondering, should we bring this into the operating budget, this difference?
Yes.
That's a risk. So we could. But however, we're optimistic that it will all be funded. The 80%
That's what I'm saying, so that other number is based on this full funding.
Yeah, it is. I don't know what we would do if we don't get the costume enhancement funding, because it's significant. It's a reason to maintain some surplus, for sure, to ensure that if this does go sideways, there is a way to make up for that. But it's intended that there will be a second release of funding. They're not saying this is it, this is all you're getting. There is a second phase, stage 2. They're just saying this is what we're committing now. Maybe we don't think it's going to be as bad next year. I don't know.
Yeah, it is essentially a commitment issue. They're not saying it's not there. They're just saying they're only putting this much up front. And again, just to be clear, it's not just our district. This is across the province. It's not that we got hit with a 19%.
Yeah, that's a problem.
This is across the province. So we are not alone, and there's no way we're going to survive without that money coming in.
But sometime between now and May 15th.
You won't have it. So this is where this gets complicated. Because as a board, you can't budget for a deficit. We may know that there's $7 million in teacher costs that we need to put in the classroom enhancement fund. The board can only budget $5.5 million of those. So we're actually creating a budget that's insufficient, that we know not to be complete. Because the accounting rules and the ministry rules and the school act says you can't budget for a deficit.
So perhaps Trustee Spilsbury can enlighten us on this logical approach.
No, I can't enlighten us, but I am wondering why we haven't heard a lot of noise about the lack of full funding here. I don't understand it.
The province hasn't said that you won't receive it. They just haven't said that you will.
Or you won't get it up front.
Yeah. They're pretty confident that everybody's going to be roughly at 80% of where they were last year, so that's what they've committed. Because collective agreements won't have changed. But the balance of it's going to come through stage 2. So the amended budget should be the complete amount when we finally get to that process in February. But what's being allotted today is not what we actually know our expenses are going to be. Doesn't answer the question.
You want a follow-up question before Trustee Smith?
Yes. But You go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for explaining that because I've got alarm bells going off in my head now. So, only because I've gone down the road of not sufficiently budgeting before. If our budget, our bottom budget figure is the full amount, but we, at this point in our budget process, do not have that full amount, then how are we legally putting in a document saying that we balanced our budget when we're $6,794,000 short?
No, only the difference, right? Sure.
Or whatever whatever the difference is, like, how are we doing that? Because legally, that's, I mean, we have to put in exactly what our expenses are gonna be,
Ministry direction is to budget on the,
full amount.
no, on the allocation.
So, my follow-up question now is can we, in any way, decrease what we have in place that normally funds classroom enhancement costs? Like, we can't hire less teachers,
Can't,
we can't,
no,
there are EAs in there, like what's
EAs are in the
open to
overhead.
us?
We have the education assistants in the overhead. They are a result of the implementation of the classroom enhancement fund, but they are not a requirement of language in the classroom enhancement fund. So we were able to make the argument that we had to hire a bunch of new EAs because we couldn't put them in, group kids anymore. Now, they haven't not said they're going to fund something, they just haven't funded it yet. Like in overhead, last year we received a notional amount. It still wasn't the right amount. Right? So there was an amount that was given out, it was $400,000. We knew it was going to be more than that, but we budgeted on $400,000 and we went back to them later on to get the $1 million for the overhead. It's kind of a similar process. They have at least left us columns on the funding announcement that goes, stage 1 is populated, stage 2 isn't, stage 3 isn't, and overhead isn't. So they do have an intent to come back and readdress those areas. We just don't know the amounts yet. And we can't budget for more revenue that's been committed by the province. I don't know if there is an answer.
You're looking for a logical explanation, I'm not sure you're gonna find it.
Trustees Phillips.
So the overhead dollars have not been committed, but we're still gonna be staffing for
Well, that's the
what we
decision.
had last year.
That's the decision. That's something we need to figure out through this process. That's why I'm bringing this. That's why this slide is here. It becomes a risk factor.
So what is the total uncommitted dollars at this point between overhead and the other piece? What is the total dollars missing so far from government that's not shown in our budget right now? What is that dollar amount?
I think next year's overhead, if we do what we did this year, which is it provides, this year we budgeted $75,000 because there's a component of the memorandum of agreement that talks about in-service for classroom teachers that have children with designations in them. $75,000. There's sick leave for those teachers, depending on how many there are. That is over $200,000. There's $500,000 worth of education assistance currently in there. There's a clerical position. There's 3 custodians. That's about $180,000. I mean, it's about $1.1 million of funding that would be needed next year for overhead to sustain what we did this year. And there'll be an application process for that. We're but it's not here
We
yet.
don't know what the application process is or what a notional allocation is yet.
But why are we left in the dark at this stage? And so it begs the question.
How can we budget?
Sorry?
How can we budget?
I know. So I'm just wondering whether our chairperson could write a strongly worded letter to the Minister of Education and our 2 MLAs and express our frustration and disappointment with this process. I don't want to wait till the first meeting in May to get that message to them. But I think we need to do that now. I mean, this is just silly.
Sorry, I have to breathe for a second.
There is a memo that is around this area. I do have it in my budget binder there. You're welcome to read it if you're preparing for a motion. It is information we can copy for for the committee now. Does explain their process around the classroom enhancement fund funding.
But I guess my concern is, we don't know what our dollars are. We don't have a guarantee. We're going into a budget process on what ifs, and I think everyone in this room knows that I hate the what ifs. Because if the money doesn't come through, 90% of our budget is humans who have already gone through processes, so we can't cut them, so that leaves less than 10% of our budget to go after for possibly a couple $1 million. And we could be decimating other things. So my concern is here we are, being responsible, going into the budget process, getting it done at a timely manner to get staffing done, when we don't even know what we're budgeting for, if what you're saying is, oh, so technically we're trying to be responsible, but we're being irresponsible because we're budgeting for dollars we're not guaranteed, I guess is my concern.
Upon government's direction.
Correct.
Or lack of direction.
So how do we move forward in a legal manner if we're,
It's a balanced budget. It just doesn't, I mean, it's the same, you have to always have a balanced budget even if you know it's going to be a deficit. So let's say the board had a projected shortfall at the end of the year. You're doing your amended budget.
Yeah.
And you know that it's not going to balance at the end of the year. You just know. There's nothing you can do to turn this around. Something happened that just sent one of the expenditures off the rails.
Yeah.
And you can't make reductions at this time. You still have to file a balanced budget even though you know it's not correct. That's legislation. Your budget has to be balanced.
you know,
So you would obtain that money from where to balance it?
You don't budget all the expenditures that you know are going to happen. That's,
So it's false budget.
I can't say that. I've gotten into too much trouble in 2001 with the particular deputy minister. No, minister, yeah.
So, my concern about a motion is that this body reports to the board, which is 3 weeks away, and I believe the chairperson has the authority to write a letter without a motion, and I think it's gotta go out this week. I think, and copy to our fellow districts on the island and get a message to Victoria that this is not good practice. Madam Chairperson, would you be interested in writing a letter on behalf of the board?
I would be happy to write a letter knowing that I have support from the board in spirit.
This is really complicated.
you think?
More complicated than just deliver?
We talked about this before, about further classroom space requirements and how the board adjusts for those, and part of that is the Mill Bay Elementary was reopened. So this slide has just kind of come forward. Again, a reminder that we're at the end of the classroom enhancement fund paying for any capital improvements, or any capital additions, any space additions that may be required for classroom space. And the next part is other special purpose funds that we need to be looking at, or our Learning Improvement Fund. That one is typically done in consultation with CUPE. Those funds are for CUPE. We have to sign up on a plan how they're going to be spent. Currently adds an hour a day to an education assistant, each education assistant, to allow them collaboration time. It also provides 2 4-hour positions. So we'll go through that process again. Community Link is certainly one of our funds, $642,000, up slightly from the year before. School meals, there's student support workers, there's some community school in there, and then a facilities grant. So those are some of the more major special purpose funds that the board has as part of the budget. And we'll move on to the next slide. If there are any questions, which is really the wrap up. The feedback needs to come to trustees from the survey. Katie is working on consolidating that, and there'll be a briefing note which basically says what do people say about the budget and priorities. Staff will continue to work on options, so we've presented some now. The next options will come back at the April 18th meeting. And then from there we move into our first and second reading of the budget, which will be April 25th, so not a lot of time between now and then. Final reading on May 1st, and then staffing process starts on May the 2nd. And that's all we have this evening on budget. There'll be more to come later this week.
Any other questions?
Did you hear that, Ken?
It's not a question, but can you send that to us?
Oh, certainly, yeah. It finally was finalized about 10 minutes before this
That's
meeting,
fine,
so
I
we
just.
didn't have a chance to.
She's-
I hate to beat a dead horse, but did government give you any indication when they would let you know if those dollars are gonna be available?
There are timelines in their introduction on in their communication on the costume enhancement fund. So there is a stage 2 application. Like it's
And
not.
when is that?
It's at the end of September once we know all of our costs.
When our budget's already done and.
And we're in the process of going,
Stage an application after the budget goes?
September.
September. That's when stage 2. So when that comes through is when you'll be able to actually budget for the actual costs and costs.
See the whites of their eyes. Approach that, it sounds like.
Are the teacher's eyes or the kids' eyes?
Teachers.
And kids, I mean, kids then teachers.
And it's not that, I mean, this year we have to assume the commitment's the same. I mean, this year was really the same process, except that they gave you a notional amount up front. You could have been one of the school districts that didn't receive as much as you needed and had to go through the stage 2 application. We were one where they over distributed the notional allocation, the 8.8 million. So it probably seems a little less comfortable for us next year than it did this year. But if you were Saanich School District, that their notional allocation was half of what you actually needed, they were budgeting under the same parameters that we are this year, that their notional allocation wasn't sufficient for what they knew they needed to operate their district, and they got their balance of funding after the processes that were in place. So, I can't speak to government's reasons around so far only allocating $284 million to this, but that's where we're at today. So that's their first allocation.
Trustee Thorne?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that somewhere down the road we can have a sit down and talk to the schools, the money people, and say we need to change the system because we're going into this with a black eye, and waiting till the last minute is kind of ridiculous. It's kind of like now you guys know how we feel when we work with Indian Affairs. It's crazy. And that's been my number one concern since day one is the funding formula, how it's set up, and nothing seems to be, although we skim by, we need more time, we need more understanding, and they've got to release more money quicker without saying we'll give you a percentage now and a percentage later.
I think that's a pretty major theme of the funding formula survey or funding formula review that the districts are, the stable, predictable funding keeps coming up. Stable, predictable funding. How do districts budget without knowing what you're going to receive for the year, and how do you do that? I think a good step that the board has taken is to not spend every dollar in the bank account. Which was the previous way that we operated, where we didn't have a contingency policy and have surplus money aside. I mean, this budget so far does leave money in surplus. Something goes really sideways, there is still money in surplus. So you do have that, and that's consistent with your policy direction around accessing the surplus, unforeseen circumstances. But it doesn't make it easy not knowing the customer enhancement. It doesn't leave us with a good feeling when we file the budget that all the money is going to be coming until we actually get it delivered.
Okay, any other business at this time? So the takeaway is Sherpinson is going to write a strongly worded letter with plenty of powerful adjectives.
okay, send me your adjectives.
I'll provide the the ministry's correspondence around the issue.
Okay,
I need to provide that to you.
thank you.
We thought the adjectives.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Trustee Smith, trustee Guido, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried.
Jason, that